Hello, this is episode 6 of my 8-foot tall Thanos costume build. In this video I'll be making the final parts of the armour, which are the shins and the boots. If you like the sound of an 8-foot tall Thanos costume, make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the little notification bell and give this video a thumbs up too. Done that? Well, let's get cracking then. Right, so we start out as always with the printouts, and a lot of these are printed over more than one piece of paper, so you've got to stick those together using the little marks in the corners to line up the pages. And then cut all these parts out using scissors, making sure you carefully follow the line so you don't make the parts too big or too small. And as for mats, I've had a lot of people ask me what kind of mats I use. I get these from Halfords. These are meant to go on the floor. They're interlocking mats. They come in a pack of 6 and you can get 6 mats for £10. So I cut all the pieces out, and then I realised that I could have done this a bit easier. So as you can see, I'm laying out all the pieces I cut out on the templates, but the templates I've modified. So the piece there on the left is 2 pieces that could be 1. The one next to it is 3 pieces that could be 1 piece. So what I've basically done is, where I can reduce seams, is just join all those pieces up. So this piece here, for example, as long as you get the edges right and the outside edge is nice and neat, what happens on the middle of that piece doesn't really matter. There's a little bit of gap between the 3 pieces in the middle, but that's going to be irrelevant once you come to tracing that out. So don't worry about that. As long as you've got the outside perimeter nice and neat, it's all cool. These little bits here, I just stuck all these pieces together using 1 piece of tape for this little skinny piece and 2 bits for the big thicker piece. And I just made sure that the top one and the bottom one were the correct distance apart by measuring that same distance on the Pepicura model. So from tip to tip on that one, and then each of the sides from the corner to corner on one side, corner to corner on the other side. Measured that in Pepicura Designer. Start the top and the bottom one that distance, and then equally space the ones in between. So I pinned these onto the foam, making sure you pin them in such a way that you can get the most out of each mat. Don't worry about leaving little pinholes in the foam, they'll soon disappear. And then I draw around all my pieces with the back of a knife. And then using a very, very sharp knife, cut them all out. Now I wouldn't recommend cutting out the left and the right shin at the same time, in case you get the pieces muddled up and it get a bit confusing. When you're cutting, try to make sure you keep your knife nice and level. You don't want to put a bevel in the cut. Now I like to pre-bend all of the pieces of foam that need to be bent, so I use a heat gun, apply heat to the back side only, and then bend that by hand, being careful not to burn my fingers. Marking out those parts that we stuck together in segments. Obviously where there's tape running up the middle of this one, the lines are incomplete, so I'm just joining those up with a ruler. Once they're all cut out, they look something like this. This is the skinnier of the 2 pieces. Now I'm going to apply glue to the top edge only of one of the little recessed bits, and then stick that slightly back on the piece next to it. And then once that's set, I'll stick some more glue on that top edge and stick it to the next piece, and so on and so on. And then you have pieces like this. This piece here that is made up of a few pieces, I couldn't stick all of them together, otherwise it wouldn't give me the correct shape, so I've had to leave those 2 V shapes cut into the back of that. So I'm going to heat this now and bend it into shape so that those 2 edges join up. Just using some tape to hold that into place after it's been heated, as I've only got 2 hands and I want to hold both seams together at once ideally, save time. A little bit more heat, And the idea is to have these seams joined together almost perfectly without any glue. That way they're not trying to always pull themselves apart, which won't put any stress on the glue seam. So take that tape off now, and that's pretty much staying closed on its own. So that'll make that easier to glue together. I like to use hot glue for all my foam builds. That's because I'm far too impatient to mess around with contact adhesive or anything else. But you can use whatever you like. Each glue has its own good points and bad points. With this piece here, I find it's easier to stick the bottom piece in, then the top piece, and then gradually fix the middle afterwards. If you start from one end and work your way up, you might get to the top and realise that it's not aligned properly, whereas if you do the top first, then the bottom, and then you can kind of work the middle in using a bit of heat, and the top and the bottom are going to be already right anyway. Just be careful when you're heating something you've already glued, like this little detail piece here, because too much heat and all that's going to come undone. Sometimes when you can't hold these things together, I use a lot of pins. Now if you just stick these in straight, then they're just going to pull back out straight. So I stick them in diagonally, one facing one way, and then one facing the other way. So it's a lot harder for them to pull themselves apart. I'm working my way down most of the seam, putting as many pins in as it takes to hold that together. Deliberately keeping this clip nice and long so you can see roughly how long it takes in real time to do a seam like this. So that's a lot of pinning, a bit of heating and bending. And then a little more bending. And a few more pins. Now it's important to note that I'm sticking these pins into the foam. They're not going straight through and out the other side. And if they do come out the other side, they're well away from the seam. And the reason that is because I put glue down the back side of this, and if the pins came through and you end up gluing the pins, it's going to be very hard to pull them back out. And then even if you did get them out, you'd have all glue all over your pins and they wouldn't go into the next piece of foam very easily. So just hold that until it's set. Now these Pepicure files are far from perfect, so sometimes you do have to add little bits here and there. Like this piece, for example, is missing a very thin strip of foam. It's present on the Pepicure file, but it was a piece that was left out. It just wasn't unfolded and made as part of the printouts. I've just cut a very thin rectangle of foam here. It's probably about 5mm or so thick, and I'm just going to stick that in. A bit more heat and a bit more bending just to make these seams join up again as before. And a lot of tape. You don't have to use electrical tape. In fact, electrical tape probably isn't ideal for using with hot glue because the glue can burn straight through it. Masking tape would be better, but I buy my electrical tape in big multi-packs, so it works out cheaper. With the foam, you can heat it and kind of stretch it by pulling it, or you can kind of squish it in and contract it to make parts slightly shorter too. This is something you can't do with cardboard, so if you're going to try and build this and use something that isn't foam, so it isn't flexible and you can bend with heat, it might not work so well. So now the shin is mostly built, it's time to join up the two halves. And this final seam can sometimes be a bit tricky, so I tend to make it so it's on the back, so if it is a bit sloppy it won't be seen, and I try to keep it as a straight seam as possible. So I've chose this seam here in particular because it's nice and straight. And again gluing that from the inside, and once these seams have been glued from the inside I then go ahead and glue those from the outside as well. This trim piece, I'm just putting that on the edge of my table and using a really sharp knife to cut a bevel into that, so it sits at an angle. And I've got loads of bits of tape stuck to the edge of my table there that I've pre-cut off, so I can stick this down, tape it into place, and then move on to the next piece, and so on, rather than only being able to glue as much as I can hold into place with my hands. With the hot glue I find you can't really go further than say 4 or 5 inches at a time, otherwise if you go further than that the glue's already cooled down so much that it doesn't stick anymore. So now the shin's pretty much done, onto the boot, and these pieces have been modified too. I've stuck a lot of these together to minimise the pieces, minimise the seams, and to make it a more simple build. Going to cut some bevels into these pieces to give the toe area a bit of a curve to it. So again, holding that over the edge of my table and cutting at about a 45-degree angle to remove the corner of the back side. And then heat on the back of this, and then bend that into place. Add a bit of glue and some more tape to hold it down. So it's just a case of pinning the pieces together now in layers, starting from this part here which is kind of midway up the shoe. the parts that join up perfectly flat you can't pin together, so that's where a lot of tape comes in handy, and you'll find you'll go through lots and lots of tape and then gradually heat this and bend it round. Now this is the sole of the shoe. I never cut this out of foam, but I am pinning this down to the back side of a mat, and I'm doing it to the back side of a mat because if I get glue on it, it won't matter, and I can still use this mat for other things. And the glue can peel off of the back side easier than it can the other side as well. And I'm now going to heat this piece, which is the back of the foot, the heel. I'm going to bend it to a rough shape. So this is the base layer, the trim of the boot. So I'm going to lay that around the template and pin it down just from the inside. I better get those pins out easy enough at the end because there's a big hole in the top of the boot where your foot goes in. Cutting a bevel in this piece is right on the front of the shoe. And I'm going to heat that and curve that. More glue and tape. This makes up the next layer. And yes, I really did just chuck pins all over myself. What a genius. Anyway, moving along swiftly, going to pin this into place, heating it as I go, starting off at the front, and then once that's pinned into place, gluing it from the inside just as we did with the shin. And then once that glue is completely set on the inside, you can then glue on the outside too. So you just repeat this for all of the layers, pinning into place, heating, bending, and then gluing from the inside before removing the pins and gluing from the outside. Once you've done that, remove all the pins from inside holding it to that mat. Remove all of the pins holding the layers together, because they're not needed anymore because you've glued it on the inside. And then any bits you've missed, just go back around that with a glue gun and glue from the outside too. And here's one shin slash shoe all done. I've of course made two. Only difference is with this one I've pinned on that part there, if you remember from the end of the thigh building tutorial. This part was meant to go on the bottom of the thigh according to the Pepicura file, but I think it would be better suited to go on top of the shin. We're not going to know whether that's the case until we go to making this wearable, so I've pinned it onto this one for now so I can do a bit of a comparison in a future episode. Now these shoes are absolutely huge. If we compare this shoe to a normal shoe, you'll see what I mean. Look at that, it's insane. So walking in these is going to be quite fun. And also I've left out the soles, and that's not because I'm missing the sole stone, but because I think foam soles on these would be a bad idea, because it's squidgy. Foam is squidgy, so it might deform left or right or whatever and make the whole thing unstable, which would be unsafe. And also if I'm walking on something like concrete or whatever, the concrete will wear the foam away in next to no time, which again will make it unstable and unsafe. So I'm going to make the soles out of something hard wearing, probably wood I'd imagine, but that won't be until a future episode, which will be making it wearable, which will be the next challenge in fact, because the Pepicura side of this is all done. All of this was made using Peppercure files, and I've had like 1 million people ask me where the files can be found, and I've now made a Facebook group called the Perfectly Imperfect Makers Community, where I'm going to share all of my templates and files, and it'll also be a place for other makers to share their work as well, and it'll be really cool. So make sure you check out the description of this video for a link to that. So as there's no templates now, I've kind of got to make the rest of this up as I go along. So I think the first thing to do is to make it all so I can wear it. So I'm going to tackle the stilts that are going to need to go inside the shoes, and also the torso needs to sit at such a height where I can just about peer over the top of the chest, I suppose. So that's going to be what's going to be happening in the next episode. So make sure you subscribe to this channel to keep an eye out for that. Be sure to also check out the social media links in the description of this video. And remember, you don't have to be great at making to make something great. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.